In class, we were talking about Pete Mondrian and his full embrace of abstraction beginning around 1919 and continuing for the rest of his life, the utter simplification of art to three primary colors, horizontals and verticals, with a black and white grid that is nothing more than horizontal and vertical. And I had mentioned that we were going to get around to discussing how he got there, what brought him to this point. And that's what we'll look at in this particular screencast. He was Dutch by birth, as you noticed, we talked about before. He schooled in Amsterdam. And in the early part of his career, he does fairly traditional Dutch scenic types. Rembrandt's mill, for example, in the 17th century is a common theme in Dutch art. Through the centuries, we can find various artists from Holland who are fascinated by the Dutch mills, and Mondrian is no different. So he begins as this fairly traditional artist in the early part of the 20th century. Then in 1908, he began to study modern spirituality, and especially, as we talked about in class, theosophy. And remember that theosophy was the ancient basis for all religions, and taught that there was a metaphysical harmony that lay behind the chaos of the world, and that the things that we see around us can only distract us from that perfection, from that harmony. And as Mondrian begins to study this spiritual movement, quasi-spiritual philosophical movement of theosophy, his works start to become increasingly more expressive. So our dying sunflower here is still rooted in observation, but at the same time it shows him trying to find something behind the nature that he observes, trying to find something different than what he actually sees. And this will become the first steps toward the kind of art that he eventually ends up with. But it's important to remember that his approach to expressionism, and that certainly is what this is, an expressionist work of art, his approach is one that's based on this idea of spiritualism, of seeing through the everyday, through nature itself, to something greater beyond. Through year by year, Mondrian moves deeper and deeper into expressionism. In this case, he's very much inspired by one of his great heroes in art, which is his fellow Dutch painter, Van Gogh. This small Van Gogh up at the Baltimore Museum of Art is closely parallel, and you can notice the use of the brushstrokes, the enlivening of the negative space, the use of non-naturalistic colors, all sort of having a root in the works of Van Gogh. He'd also been looking, Mondrian had, very much at Gauguin, and also paying attention to other modern movements at this time, in particular the Fauves and their use of non-representational colors. He also, I think, is very much interested in the German expressionists, too, people like Kirchner. And is using these different movements to his own ends, which is, again, to try to find some harmony that lays behind observed nature. He develops all of these ideas while he's still living in Holland. It's only in 1911 that he actually moves to Paris. And when he arrives there, he gets there at exactly the moment that Picasso and Braque are developing analytic cubism, and I think you can see that the influence is quite obvious. Similar tonality, these moss greens and foresty beiges being applied to the work, but at the same time you wouldn't really confuse it for Picasso or Braque, because as you can see, it doesn't have that sort of faceting, glass-like metaphors that they had in so many of their works. But rather he's using the Cubist idea not to suggest the elapsing of time so much as to help him delve towards some sort of structure that's beneath the reality that he's observing in the world around him. It's worth noting that he didn't really collaborate with Picasso and Braque. He saw their works, but he didn't work with them. He didn't work alongside them. He's really kind of working in isolation. So from the Cubist comes an idea in his work to look through nature to find a structure, to find the order beneath the chaos, and this is what will drive his development. You can already see in the flowering apple tree on your right that in addition to the forms that suggest leaves or branches, there's also beginning to be an overlay of horizontals and verticals, and you see this especially at the top. So up in here you start to see this lattice work being developed. And this you can see picked up in other works from around this same time as he was beginning to work in Paris and beginning to see the world as nothing more than a series of opposites that balance each other out, horizontals and verticals now replacing everything else. So Pier and Ocean, which takes this sort of is superseded by the title composition number 10, which in itself suggests that it's meant to be abstract, is meant to be looking down a pier. So in the center here is where we have the pier sitting on the ocean itself, and the ocean providing the horizontals that run past that. But again, abstracted to nothing more than a series of horizontals and verticals. In writing about what he was trying to achieve, he said that these oppositions, these interactions, these intersections of horizontals and verticals, neutralize each other and they produce equilibrium. He said that each element in nature is determined by its antithesis, by its contrary. And his works now are trying to achieve balance through simply the ticking off of horizontal and vertical forms. Up to this point, his works still have a subject matter. There still is the idea that there is, in fact, something there, that there is a figure against a ground of sorts, although that's beginning to be pushed to the side. It's finally in 1919 that he gets to the idea of subject matter-less art, where the grid covers the entire composition and it becomes nothing more than this balance, this harmony that's achieved by the placements of horizontals and verticals and the three primary colors, which is what we see in the rest of his works. This final push to abstraction that we see in both of these works comes when Mondrian leaves Paris during World War I and goes back to Mother Holland, where he's from, and which is at this point neutral in the war. He's fled the chaos. He's gone back into even deeper isolation. He's working these ideas all out on his own, finding harmony when all of Europe has erupted in chaos. And his final push in this direction abandons observation as the basis for the compositions. They now are just composition with grid number 9, not pier and ocean, not flowering apple tree, or anything like that. It's totally non-representational. And this total grid that covers the entire canvas is really a breakthrough, because he's totally denied the idea of a figure-ground relationship. Even some of our most abstract artists that we've looked at, like Malevich, always had figures against a background. These abstract red rectangles all floating against the white background, each of which he's painted very thoroughly. But with Mondrian, you're hard-pressed to say what is the figure and what is the ground. There is just the painting. This is the style. And it's from here, then, that he pushes into the signature style that we talked about in class, whether rectangular, roughly square compositions with this horizontal vertical grid that he now turns into larger and varied rectangles, that grid continuing even if the canvas is turned on its edge, as in these lozenge compositions. As he develops these ideas, again, another work from the Baltimore Museum of Art, we can see that he doesn't always use all three colors, but rather works his way through various combinations of the different ones that we've seen. But really, the style itself, after all, it is called the style, has changed really very, very little. In the 30s, he begins to morph only ever so slightly. Here's a one from the Hirshhorn, where you can see the lines now double up, and we get this other interplay of the intersecting lattice work of double lines now, creating smaller white spaces rather than single lines, thicker, breaking up broader expanses. Another work from the late 30s in the Phillips Museum, the Phillips collection, where we can see, in fact, the same idea, and again with some changes. In this case, you'll notice quite clearly that the red on the left over here has been placed on top of the black. It doesn't exist or is not isolated by black outlines. This is true for our three red areas here as well, that each one of them is independent from being enclosed by those black lines, and even our yellow here seems to float behind the line that's in front of it. So some interesting things are happening as he plays with the style through the course of his career. The biggest change to his works comes when he moves to New York City in 1940. This was when Hitler invaded Holland. At this point, avoiding World War II. And in Holland, and when Hitler comes in 1940, Mondrian moves to New York City. And you can see that, I guess if you want to call it a change, this is a rather radical departure from what he's been doing. The black lines are entirely gone now. And the grid is made up by primary colors with shades of gray in a sort of staccato rhythm. It's still incredibly meticulously painted, as you can see in this detail, that he's really quite concerned with how each of these squares is put onto the canvas, and the brush strokes vary. Sometimes they're horizontal, or vertical that is, sometimes they're horizontal. Sometimes it seems as if the white has been painted on top of the color, and then sometimes it seems like the color has been painted on top of the white just above it. So he's really paying quite a bit of attention to how he handles the medium, which is of course important when you have a work when there's nothing much left but the medium. He gave some reasons for this change in his style and the sorts of things that he was responding to on having moved to New York. The first thing that he said he was responding to were the busy colors and sounds of the city, traffic lights, walk, don't walk, horns, automobile lights. And on a certain level, his Broadway boogie woogie sort of looks like a street map, maybe like a Google map where traffic problems have been highlighted. And you almost get the sense that the little colored squares and rectangles are vehicles moving up and down the avenues. And certainly New York, unlike most European cities, is based on this kind of a grid. The other big influence that Mondrian mentioned for Broadway Boogie Woogie is highlighted by the title, and this was jazz music. We saw a connection between jazz's free forms and rhythms of various notes and instruments that interweave together. He saw a connection with this in his own work. And he said that his paintings really were meant to mirror syncopated beats that he was hearing in bebop. Charlie Parker, for example, was quite popular in the early 40s in New York. And scat vocals by people like Ella Fitzgerald, having this sort of rhythm of abstract notes that come together to form a sense of harmony. Mondrian said that that was a very important part of this work as well. So here, almost at the very end of his life, we see some change to the basic grid that we've seen before, but at the same time, his principles of finding harmony through abstraction, a harmony that lies beneath the veneer of the chaos of the world, even the chaos of New York, or the seeming chaos of bebop jazz music. Mondrian is still looking for that perfect harmony all the way until the end of his life.